The rain hit her apartment window like tiny fists, each drop seeming to echo the emptiness inside her chest. Maya sat curled up on her old couch, staring at the single cupcake with one flickering candle. 34 years old today, and she was celebrating alone. Again. The phone rang, cutting through the silence like a knife. She knew it would be her sister calling to check on her, probably feeling guilty for not being able to visit this year. Maya let it ring 3 more times before picking up. "Happy birthday, sis." Her sister's cheerful voice filled the small living room. "I'm so sorry I can't be there. The kids are sick and David had to work late again." "It's okay, really." Maya tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm just having a quiet evening." There was a pause on the other end. Her sister knew her too well. "Maya, are you all right? You sound different." That's when the dam broke. All those years of holding it together, of pretending she was fine with being alone, of telling herself that she was strong and independent, the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "No man has ever truly wanted me." Her voice cracked as she said it. "I'm 34 years old and I've never had a real relationship, never had someone choose me over everyone else. I'm invisible." Her sister's silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then came the usual responses, the ones Maya had heard 1,000 times before. "That's not true, Maya. You're beautiful, and smart, and funny. The right person just hasn't come along yet. You say that every year." Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But look at the evidence. In high school, I was the girl guys came to for homework help, never for dates. In college, I was the friend they talked to about other girls. Every dating app, every setup, every chance encounter, nothing. I'm the woman men look through, not at." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, her sister trying to lift her spirits with stories about late bloomers and unexpected romance. But when Maya finally hung up, the silence felt even heavier than before. She walked to her bathroom mirror and studied her reflection. Average height, brown hair that never seemed to cooperate, eyes that were neither striking green nor deep brown, but somewhere forgettably in between. She wasn't ugly, but she wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads either. She was just there. The next morning, Maya dragged herself to work at the Pine Ridge Library. It was her sanctuary, really. Among the books and quiet corners, she felt useful. The elderly patrons appreciated her recommendations. The college students needed her research help. Children smiled when she read stories during weekend programs. But even there, she was invisible to men her age. "Good morning, Maya." Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, greeted her warmly. "How was your birthday?" "Quiet," Maya replied, settling at her desk. "Just how I like it." Mrs. Chen studied her with knowing eyes but didn't press. That was another thing Maya appreciated about the library. People respected boundaries here. The morning passed slowly. Maya helped a graduate student find historical documents about the local Native American tribes. She recommended a mystery novel to a regular patron who'd read everything else in the genre. She updated the computer system and organized the returned books. Around lunchtime, a group of women from her high school class came in, planning their 15-year reunion. Maya recognized them immediately. Jennifer, the homecoming queen who'd married her high school sweetheart. Lisa, the cheerleader who now ran a successful business. Katie, the smart one who'd become a lawyer and found love in law school. They were friendly enough, including Maya in their conversation about the reunion planning. But as they talked about their husbands, their children, their full lives, Maya felt herself shrinking smaller and smaller. "Maya, you have to come to the reunion," Jennifer said. "It'll be so fun to catch up with everyone." "I'll think about it," Maya replied, knowing she wouldn't go. The thought of standing in a room full of married couples, of being the only single person there, made her stomach turn. After they left, Maya escaped to the reference section, her favorite hiding spot. She pulled out a book about local wildlife and tried to lose herself in pictures of mountain landscapes and forest creatures. But even the peaceful images couldn't quiet her thoughts. She thought about David from college, who'd spent hours studying with her in the library, sharing coffee and dreams about the future. She'd been so sure he felt something too. until the night he asked her to help him plan the perfect date with another girl. She remembered Tom from her first job, who'd made her laugh during lunch breaks and stayed late to help her with projects. For months she'd thought maybe, finally, someone saw her as more than a friend. Then he'd started dating the new receptionist and stopped eating lunch with Maya altogether. There was Kevin from her hiking club, who'd seemed to enjoy their conversations about books and nature. They'd even gone on a few group trips together. Maya had worked up the courage to suggest they grab dinner sometime, just the two of them. He'd looked so uncomfortable, stumbling through an explanation about how he valued their friendship too. Much to complicate it, each rejection had been polite, kind even. But they all said the same thing. She was wonderful as a friend, but not the kind of woman they desired, not the kind they dreamed about or fought for or chose. The afternoon brought a steady stream of patrons, keeping Maya busy enough to push the dark thoughts aside. She helped a mother find parenting books, assisted a teenager with a research project, and processed a stack of new acquisitions. As closing time approached, she found herself dreading the return to her empty apartment. The silence there felt different from the comfortable quiet of the library. At work, the silence was full of stories waiting to be discovered. At home, it echoed with all the conversations she'd never had, all the laughter she'd never shared. Mrs. Chen approached her desk as Maya was shutting down her computer. "Maya, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you doing all right? You seem sadder than usual lately." Maya looked up at the older woman who'd become like a mother to her over the past 5 years. Mrs. Chen had always been perceptive, but she also understood the value of not pushing too hard. "I'm just feeling a bit sorry for myself," Maya admitted. "Birthday blues, I guess." "Ah," Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "Those can be difficult, especially when we measure our lives against some imaginary timeline. It's not imaginary when everyone else seems to be hitting the same milestones except you," Maya said quietly. Mrs. Chen sat down in the chair across from Maya's desk. "You know, when I was your age, I was convinced I was destined to be alone. My parents had given up on finding me a husband. My friends were all married with children. I spent my evenings cataloging books and my weekends reading alone in my apartment." Maya looked up surprised. She'd never heard this story before. "But you married Mr. Chen when you were 38, right?" 39, actually. Mrs. Chen smiled. "He was the most unexpected person. Quiet, serious, more interested in his garden than in charming anyone. But he saw something in me that no one else had bothered to look for, and I saw something in him that others overlooked too." "How did you meet?" "He came to the library looking for books about sustainable farming. This was back when that was considered quite unusual. He was so passionate about taking care of the land, about growing things naturally. We started talking about books, then about gardening, then about everything else." Maya tried to imagine Mrs. Chen young and single, feeling the same emptiness she felt now. "The point is," Mrs. Chen continued, "I had convinced myself that love looked a certain way, came at a certain time, with a certain type of person. I was so busy looking for what I expected that I almost missed what was actually right in front of me." "But what if nothing's in front of me?" Maya asked. "What if I'm just one of those people who's meant to be alone?" Mrs. Chen reached over and patted her hand. "Maya, you are one of the kindest, most intelligent people I know. You have so much love to give, but I think maybe you've been looking for someone to complete you, when what you really need is someone who appreciates the complete person you already are." After Mrs. Chen left, Maya sat alone in the darkening library, thinking about her words. The rain had started again, drumming against the tall windows that faced the mountains. In the distance, she could see the forest that surrounded their small town, dark and mysterious, and somehow comforting. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right about some things. Maybe Maya had been looking for love in the wrong places with the wrong expectations. But it didn't change the fundamental truth she felt in her bones. She had spent 34 years being invisible to the men she'd hoped would see her. As she locked up the library and walked to her car, Maya made a decision. She would stop looking. Stop hoping. Stop putting herself in situations where she could be disappointed again. She would focus on her work, her books, her small but peaceful life. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of, but it was the life she had. The drive home was quiet, her windshield wipers keeping rhythm with her thoughts. Tomorrow there would be new books to catalog, new patrons to help, new stories to discover. She could build a good life around those things. She could be content, if not happy. But as she unlocked her apartment door and stepped into the familiar silence, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the vast forest that surrounded her small town, her story was. Maya stared at the email on her computer screen and groaned. A mandatory team-building retreat, 3 days at Pine Ridge Wilderness Camp, complete with outdoor activities, group challenges, and trust-building exercises. It was literally her worst nightmare. "Did you see the email about the retreat?" asked Jenny, the young woman who worked part-time in the children's section. She looked excited, which made Maya feel even worse about her own dread. "Unfortunately, yes." Maya closed, her laptop a little harder than necessary. 3 days of pretending to be outdoorsy and social. Just what I needed. "Come on, it might be fun. When's the last time you did something different?" Maya considered this. The last time she'd done something truly different was probably never. Her life was built on routine, on the safety of familiar patterns. The library, her apartment, the grocery store, the coffee shop on weekends. Stepping outside that circle felt dangerous, but she didn't have a choice. Mrs. Chen had made it clear that attendance was expected, not optional. 2 weeks later, Maya found herself standing in the parking lot of Pine Ridge Wilderness Camp with a duffel bag she'd borrowed from her sister and a sense of impending doom. The other library staff members were chatting excitedly about the activities planned for the weekend. Maya just wanted to go home. The camp was beautiful, she had to admit. Tall pine trees surrounded rustic cabins, and she could hear a stream bubbling somewhere nearby. Mountains rose up on all sides, their peaks still touched with snow even though it was late spring. If she could just hide in her cabin with a good book, it might actually be peaceful. "Welcome, everyone." A cheerful woman with a clipboard approached their group. "I'm Linda, and I'll be your retreat coordinator. We have an amazing weekend planned for you. First up, you'll be divided into small groups for survival skills workshops." Maya's heart sank. Survival skills. She could barely survive a normal day without coffee and her carefully organized schedule. "Maya Patterson, you're in Group 3, with Jake, Brian, and Sophia from your library. Plus, we've mixed in some folks from other groups to help you meet new people. Your instructor will be Dylan, one of our wilderness guides." Maya looked around for her group members and spotted them near a fire pit. Jake and Brian from maintenance were already joking around, clearly excited about the outdoor activities. Sophia from circulation looked as nervous as Maya felt. The other people must be from the county office retreat that was happening the same weekend. "Is that our group?" Maya asked Sophia as they approached the fire pit. "I think so. I have no idea what we're supposed to do." As they got closer, Maya saw a man crouched by the fire pit, arranging kindling with careful precision. He looked up as they approached, and Maya felt a little jolt of surprise. He wasn't what she'd expected from a wilderness guide. He was probably in his late 30s with weathered hands and quiet eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. His brown hair was streaked with early gray, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the outdoors. But what struck Maya most was how still he seemed. In a world full of people trying to fill every silence, he appeared content to let quiet moments exist. "You must be Group 3, he said, standing up and brushing dirt off his hands. "I'm Dylan. I run the outdoor education program here." His voice was deep and calm, the kind of voice that made you want to listen carefully. Maya found herself studying his face as he introduced the activities they'd be doing over the next few hours. "We'll start with basic fire building, then move on to shelter construction and some navigation skills. Don't worry if you've never done any of this before. Everyone learns at their own pace." Jake and Brian dove right in, eager to prove their outdoor prowess. The county office people seemed game for anything. Maya and Sophia hung back, both clearly out of their element. "I'm going to fail at all of this," Sophia whispered to Maya. "Join the club," Maya whispered back. Dylan must have heard them because he walked over with an armload of dry branches. "Why don't you two work together on this fire? I'll get you started and then you can take it from there. He knelt down between them and began showing them how to arrange the kindling. His explanations were clear and patient, without any hint of condescension. When Maya's hands shook trying to hold the matches, he didn't make her feel foolish. It takes practice, he said simply. Try holding the match closer to the wood, that's it. When her first few attempts failed, he didn't rush to take over. Instead, he sat back and let her figure it out, offering quiet encouragement when she got frustrated. I'm not really an outdoorsy person, Maya admitted as she finally got a small flame to catch. What kind of person are you? He asked, and something in his tone made her look up. He seemed genuinely curious, not just making conversation. Maya was so used to people asking polite questions they didn't really want answered. I work at the library, she said. I like books, quiet spaces, things that make sense. This makes sense too once you understand it, Dylan said, nodding toward her growing fire. It's just a different kind of logic. What kind of books do you like? Maya blinked, surprised by the change of subject. All kinds, really. But I love books about nature, even though I don't spend much time outdoors. I have this whole collection of field guides for local birds and plants that I've never actually used. For the first time since they'd met, Dylan smiled. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less serious. You might know more about the local ecosystem than anyone else here then. Book knowledge counts for a lot out here. What can you tell me about the trees around us? As Maya looked around and started identifying different species from her reading, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Someone was actually interested in what she knew. Not just being polite, but genuinely engaged. The morning continued with shelter building, where Maya surprised herself by being decent at the problem-solving aspects. Dylan noticed her contributions and made sure the rest of the group heard her ideas. Maya's right about angling the roof that way. Good thinking. She wasn't used to being acknowledged in group settings, and certainly not by men. Usually, her suggestions were ignored or credited to someone else, but Dylan had a way of making sure everyone's voice was heard. During the lunch break, most of the group gathered around the picnic tables, but Maya found herself walking toward the stream she'd heard earlier. She needed a few minutes of quiet to process the morning. She found a fallen log by the water and sat down, listening to the peaceful sound of flowing water. The forest around her was alive with small sounds: birds calling, leaves rustling, insects humming. It was different from the library's quiet, but somehow just as soothing. Mind if I join you? Maya looked up to see Dylan approaching with a sandwich and a bottle of water. She scooted over to make room on the log. It's beautiful here, she said, watching the water flow over smooth rocks. It's my favorite spot on the property, he said. Most people prefer the views from the ridge, but I like the water. It's constant but always changing. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Maya kept waiting for him to start talking, to fill the space with chatter like most people did, but Dylan seemed as comfortable with quiet as she was. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Maya tensed slightly. Questions from men usually led to uncomfortable territory. Why did you look so terrified when you got here this morning? Maya laughed, surprising herself. Was it that obvious? Only to someone who's spent a lot of time watching people try things that scare them. I'm not really a people person, Maya said. Group activities, team building, being watched while I fail at basic human things, it's basically my personal. Hell, but you're not failing. You've been one of the most thoughtful people in the group. Maya looked at him skeptically. I can barely start a fire without having a panic attack. But you kept trying, and you asked good questions. And when Sophia was struggling with the shelter design, you figured out how to explain it in a way she understood. Dylan paused. That's not failing. That's being human. Something in his tone made Maya study his face. There was understanding there, like he knew something about feeling out of place. Are you always this encouraging with disaster-prone retreat participants? Only the ones who remind me of myself, he said quietly. Before Maya could ask what he meant, the afternoon activities were starting. The group was heading out for a navigation exercise that would take them on a short hike through the forest. Maya had never been hiking before, unless you counted walking around the block near her. apartment. Her borrowed hiking boots felt clunky and unfamiliar, and she was sure she'd slow everyone down. But as they started up the trail, Dylan fell into step beside her. Not in an obvious way that would embarrass her, just naturally matching her pace. "See, that bird up there?" He pointed to a flash of blue in the trees. "Mountain bluebird," Maya said automatically, then felt foolish. "Sorry, I read about them, but I've never actually seen one." "Don't apologize. Most people can't identify a single bird they see every day. Your book knowledge is turning into real experience now." As they walked, Dylan continued pointing out wildlife and asking Maya what she knew about different plants and animals. Soon, other group members were listening in, impressed by her knowledge. "How do you know all this stuff?" Jake asked. Maya returned to work on Monday with a strange lightness in her step. The retreat had ended the day before, and she kept catching herself thinking about moments from the weekend. Dylan showing her how to read animal tracks, the way he'd listened. When she talked about the book she loved, how he'd made her sprained ankle feel like an adventure rather than a disaster. She was reorganizing the nature section when Mrs. Chen appeared beside her with a knowing smile. "You seem different today," the older woman observed. "The retreat went better than expected." "Much better," Maya admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "I actually learned some useful things." "And?" Maya looked up from the bird identification guides she was arranging. "And what?" "Maya, dear, I've known you for 5 years. You've never come back from a social event with that particular glow." Heat crept up Maya's neck. Was she that transparent? "I just had some interesting conversations about local wildlife." Mrs. Chen's smile widened. "Ah, wildlife conversations, of course." Before Maya could explain further, the bell above the front door chimed. She looked up automatically to see who was coming in and felt her heart do a strange little skip. Dylan stood just inside the entrance, looking around the library with the same quiet attention he'd given to everything at the retreat. He was wearing jeans and a simple green shirt that made his eyes look more brown than gray. In the library's soft lighting, he looked less like a wilderness guide and more like someone who belonged among the books. "Is that your wilderness instructor?" Mrs. Chen whispered, following Maya's gaze. "His name is Dylan," Maya said, trying to sound casual. Dylan of the wildlife conversations." Before Maya could respond, Dylan spotted her and walked over to their section. Her mouth went dry as he approached. "Hey," he said with that quiet smile she remembered. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was in town and thought maybe you could recommend some books." "Of course," Maya managed. "What kind of books?" "You mentioned you had a collection of field guides. I'm working on updating our educational materials at the camp, and I could use some better resources about local ecology and Native American history of the region." Maya felt herself relax. This was safe territory, books and research. She could handle this. "I'd love to help. Follow me." She led him deeper into the library, very aware of Mrs. Chen's amused gaze following them. The nature section was Maya's pride and joy, carefully organized and constantly updated with the latest research. "This is impressive," Dylan said, running, his finger along the spines of books about regional flora and fauna. "You really do know this stuff." "I spend a lot of time reading about places I never visit," Maya said, then immediately regretted how pathetic that sounded. "Until this weekend," Dylan pointed out. "Now you've been there. Your reading just became experience." He pulled out a book about traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous peoples and flipped through it carefully. Maya watched his face as he read, noticing how focused he became when something interested him. "This is exactly what I need," he said. "The camp gets a lot of school groups, and most kids don't realize that people have been living sustainably in these forests for thousands of years before the town existed. There's a whole section on traditional plant uses in Chapter 4, Maya said, and the author interviewed several tribal elders who grew up in this area." Dylan looked up from the book with genuine appreciation. "You really have read all of these, haven't you?" "Most of them," Maya admitted. "It's kind of a hobby." "It's more than a hobby. This is expertise." There was that word again. Maya still wasn't used to thinking of herself as an expert on anything. They spent the next hour going through different books, with Maya explaining which ones had the most accurate information and which authors were most respected in their fields. Dylan asked thoughtful questions and really listened to her answers. It reminded Maya of their conversations during the hike, when he'd treated her knowledge like something valuable. "I should probably let you get back to work," Dylan said finally, holding a stack of 5 books he'd chosen. "But this was really helpful. Thank you." "You're welcome. Those books are due back in 3 weeks, but you can renew them if you need more time." Dylan nodded and started to leave, then turned back. "Maya, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? I'd love to continue our conversation about the local ecosystem. You know things about this area that I'm still learning." Maya's brain seemed to freeze. A man was asking her to coffee. This didn't happen. Ever. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "Just coffee," Dylan added gently, as if he could sense her panic. "I'm new to the area, and it would be nice to talk to someone who knows so much about the region." "Okay," Maya heard herself say. "Yes, coffee sounds nice." "Great. How about Thursday evening? There's that place on Main Street, Mountain Grounds." "I know it. 6 o'clock? Perfect. I'll see you then." After he left, Maya stood frozen in the nature section, staring at the empty space where he'd been standing. Had that really just happened? So, Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow like magic. "Wildlife conversations, "It's just coffee," Maya said quickly. "He wants to talk about local ecology." "Of course he does, dear. Of course he does." The rest of the week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Maya changed her mind about what to wear approximately 15 times. She practiced conversation topics in her mirror. She read and reread every book about local history she could find, terrified of running out of things to say. By Thursday evening, she'd worked herself into such a state of nervousness that she almost called to cancel 3 times. Mountain Grounds was busy with the after-work crowd, but Maya spotted Dylan immediately. He was sitting at a corner table by the window reading what looked like one of the books he'd borrowed from the library. He looked up as she approached and smiled. "You made it. How was your week?" "Busy," Maya said, settling into the chair across from him. "How's the reading going?" "Eye-opening. That book about traditional plant uses is incredible. Did you know that the indigenous peoples here had over 50 different medicinal uses for plants that most people think are just weeds?" And just like that, Maya's nervousness began to fade. This was what she'd hoped for, a real conversation, with someone who was genuinely interested in the same things she was. They talked for 2 hours, about the books Dylan was reading, about the history of the area, about the changes they'd both noticed in local wildlife patterns. Dylan shared stories about his work at the camp, about the kids who came for programs and the adults who rediscovered their connection to nature. "What got you interested in outdoor education?" Maya asked, sipping her second cup of coffee. Dylan was quiet for a moment, turning his mug in his hands. "I used to have a different life. Office job, busy schedule, always rushing from one thing to the next. Then my marriage ended, and I realized I'd been so focused on building a career that I'd forgotten how to actually live." Maya felt her heart clench with recognition. Not about marriage, she'd never gotten that far, but about feeling disconnected from real life. "I'm sorry about your marriage. It was 5 years ago. We both knew it wasn't working, but it took us too long to admit it. She wanted someone more social, more ambitious. I wanted—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I wanted someone who could appreciate quiet moments, who didn't need constant entertainment or validation." The way he said it made Maya wonder if he was talking about more than just his ex-wife. She felt exposed, like he could see right through to all her own fears about not being exciting enough, not being the kind of woman men dreamed about. "What about you?" Dylan asked. "Have you always lived here?" "My whole life," Maya said. "After college I thought about moving to a bigger city, but I couldn't leave the mountains. This sounds silly, but I feel like I belong here, even though I spend most of my time indoors." "It doesn't sound silly at all. Some people need the city's energy, Others need space to breathe. Which do you need? Space to breathe, Dylan said without hesitation. I tried the city thing for 15 years, made decent money, had a nice house, looked successful on paper, but I felt like I was suffocating. Maya understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. Not about success, she'd never achieved much of that, but about feeling trapped in a life that didn't quite fit. Do you miss it, the old life? I miss having health insurance, Dylan said with a laugh, and a steady paycheck. But I don't miss the person I was becoming, someone who was always stressed, always trying to prove something. They talked until the coffee shop started closing around them. As they walked outside into the cool evening air, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She didn't want the evening to end. Thank you for coffee, she said as they reached her car. This was really nice. It was. Would you maybe like to do it again sometime? Maya looked up at him, trying to read his expression in the streetlight. He seemed genuine, but she'd been wrong about men's intentions before. I'd like that, she said carefully. How about this weekend? I was planning to check out some of the historical sites you mentioned. Would you want to show me around? You probably know stories about them that aren't in any guidebook. The invitation was casual, friendly, exactly the kind of thing Maya could handle. No pressure, no romantic implications, just two people with shared interests spending time together. 3 months passed like pages turning in a favorite book. Every weekend brought a new adventure with Dylan, exploring ghost towns, hiking to hidden waterfalls, visiting old cemeteries where Maya would share the stories carved in weathered stone. Their friendship had settled into something comfortable and precious, something Maya had never experienced before. But with that comfort came a growing ache she tried desperately to ignore. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her one Saturday morning as she watched Dylan carefully photographing wildflowers for the camp's nature program. The way he moved through the meadow, respectful and quiet, stopping to study each plant like it held secrets worth learning. The way he listened when she explained the traditional uses of different herbs, his face serious and interested. The way he made her feel like her knowledge mattered, like she mattered. Maya felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. This was exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. Dylan was kind to her because he was a kind person, not because he saw her as anything more than a friend and local history guide. She was reading too much into his attention, just like she had with every man before him. You're quiet today, Dylan said, appearing beside her as she sat on a fallen log at the edge of the meadow. Everything okay? Just thinking, Maya said, forcing a smile. Dylan studied her face with those perceptive eyes. Want to share what's on your mind? Maya's heart clenched. She wanted to share everything. How safe she felt with him. How he'd shown her parts of her own home she'd never seen before. How for the first time in her life she felt truly known by another person. But she also knew how that conversation would end. I've been thinking about that book idea you mentioned, she lied. About local history. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been thinking about it, among other things. That's great. Have you started writing anything down? A little. Just some notes about stories I want to include. Dylan's face lit up with genuine excitement. Maya, that's amazing. I'd love to read whatever you've written if you're comfortable sharing it. And there it was again. That careful respect for her boundaries. That genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. How was she supposed to protect her heart when he kept being so perfectly himself? Maybe when I have more, she said. They continued their exploration of the meadow, but Maya felt the weight of her unspoken feelings growing heavier with each shared smile, each moment of easy companionship. By the time they headed back to town, she'd made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. She was going to put some distance between them, before she ruined their friendship by wanting more than he could give. Same time next week? Dylan asked as they reached the library parking lot, just like he had every Saturday for the past 3 months. Actually, Maya said, her heart hammering against her ribs, I think I need to take a break from our weekend trips for a while. I have some projects I need to focus on. Dylan's expression shifted, confusion replacing the easy warmth she was used to seeing there. "Of course, is everything all right? Did I do something wrong?" "No," Maya said quickly. "You didn't do anything wrong, I need some time to work on things." It wasn't technically a lie, but it felt like one. Dylan nodded slowly, but she could see questions in his eyes that she couldn't answer without revealing everything. "Okay. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me." As Maya drove home, she felt the familiar ache of loss settling into her chest. But this time she was the one walking away before she could be left behind. It felt like progress, even though it hurt like hell. For the next 2 weeks, Maya threw herself into work and into writing. She did have stories to tell, and Dylan had been right, she could write. The words flowed easier than she'd expected, bringing the past to life on the page. But every paragraph reminded her of their conversations. Every historical anecdote connected to something he'd said or a place they'd visited together. She missed him terribly. On Thursday evening, she was working late at the library, lost in a particularly engaging story about the town's founding. When she heard the front door chime, Maya looked up to see Dylan walking toward her desk, carrying a paper bag that smelled like Chinese takeout. "Peace offering," he said, setting the bag down. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you'd been working through dinner a lot lately." Maya's heart did. That stupid fluttering thing it did whenever she saw him unexpectedly. "You didn't have to bring me food." "I know. I wanted to." Dylan pulled up a chair and sat down across from her desk. "Maya, did I do something to make you uncomfortable? Because if I did, I want to fix it." The genuine concern in his voice made Maya's chest tight. "You didn't do anything wrong, Dylan, I promise." "Then why are you avoiding me?" The direct question hung in the air between them. Maya could lie again, make up another excuse about being busy. But looking at his worried face, she found herself too tired for pretense. "Because I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "And I know that's not what you want from our friendship, so I thought it would be better to step back before I ruined things." Dylan went very still. Maya couldn't read his expression, and the silence stretched between them until she thought she might die from the awkwardness. "Maya," he said finally, his voice careful. "What makes you think that's not what I want?" Maya looked up, startled. Because it never is. Because men don't fall in love with women like me. Because I'm invisible." "You think you're invisible?" "To me?" There was something in his tone that made Maya really look at him for the first time since he'd sat down. His eyes were intense, focused on her face like she was the only person in the world. "I think you're kind and decent, and you've been a good friend to me. But I know the difference between friendship and other things, and I know which category I fall into." Dylan was quiet for a long moment, and Maya felt her heart sinking toward her shoes. This was it. This was where he would gently explain that he valued their friendship too much to complicate it, just like every other man had before him. Instead, he said, "Maya, I've been in love with you since that day at the mining settlement when you told me the story about the woman who waited on Widow's Point." Maya's brain seemed to short-circuit. "What? I've been in love with you for months. I just didn't know how to tell you without scaring you away." "That's not possible." Dylan leaned forward in his chair. "Why isn't it possible?" "Because..." Maya struggled to put into words the fundamental truth she'd lived with her entire adult life. "Because no one falls in love with me. I'm not the kind of woman men dream about. I'm the friend, the helper, the one who gets overlooked." "Maya." Dylan's voice was soft but firm. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his. "You are not invisible. To me. You have never been invisible to me. From that first day at the retreat, when you knew more about the local ecosystem than anyone else there, but tried to hide it. When you kept trying to start that fire even though you were scared. When you trusted me enough to let me help you down the mountain with your injured ankle." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, but she couldn't look away from his face. "I fell in love with your mind first," Dylan continued. "The way you see connections between things, the way you bring stories to life, the way you listen to everything, like it matters. Then I fell in love with your kindness, how you helped that nervous woman at the retreat, how you remember every regular patron's favorite authors, how you care about preserving the stories of people who lived here before us. Dylan, I'm not finished. His voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath it now. I fell in love with your curiosity, your integrity, your quiet strength. I fell in love with the way you see beauty in overlooked places and find value in forgotten stories. I fell in love with how safe and peaceful I feel when I'm with you. Maya was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks without permission. No one had ever seen her the way Dylan was describing. No one had ever noticed the parts of herself she thought were invisible. But most of all, Dylan said, reaching across the desk to take her hand, I fell in love with who I am when I'm with you. I'm not trying to prove anything or be anyone other than myself. For the first time in my life, I'm completely comfortable in my own skin, because you see me clearly and like what you see. Maya stared down at their joined hands. His were rough from outdoor work, warm and steady. She had imagined this moment in a dozen different ways, but the reality was nothing like her fantasies. It was quieter, more real, and somehow more precious because of that. I don't understand, she whispered. Why didn't you say anything before? Dylan's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Because you're careful with your heart, and you have good reason to be. Because rushing would have scared you away. Because I wanted you to trust me as a friend first, so you'd know I was safe. And because, he added with a small smile, every time I worked up the courage to tell you how I felt, you'd share some story about the history of unrequited love in this town, and I'd lose my nerve. Despite her tears, Maya laughed. I do know a lot of sad love stories. Maybe it's time for a happy one. Maya looked up at him through her tears. I'm scared. Of what? Of being wrong again. Of wanting this so much that I convince myself it's real when it's not. Of ruining the best friendship I've ever had. 1 year later, Maya stood in the bathroom mirror of the small cabin she and Dylan had rented for their camping weekend, trying to calm her nerves. Today was the day. After months of planning, they were finally launching the nature education program they'd developed together, a partnership between the library and Dylan's wilderness camp. You ready for this? Dylan appeared in the doorway, looking as nervous as she felt. As ready as I'll ever be, Maya said, smoothing down her hair one more time. The past year had transformed both of their lives in ways neither had expected. Their relationship had grown slowly and steadily, built on the foundation of friendship they'd established. There had been challenges, moments when Maya's old fears surfaced, times when Dylan worried he was pushing too hard or not enough. But they'd worked through each difficulty with the same patience and honesty that had brought them together. More surprisingly, their personal relationship had sparked professional collaboration. Maya's expertise in local history and Dylan's outdoor education skills had combined into something neither could have created alone. They'd started small, Dylan bringing school groups to the library before nature walks, Maya joining camping trips to share historical context about the places they visited. But the program had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. Today, they were officially launching Stories in the Wilderness, a comprehensive educational experience that taught children about ecology, history, and conservation through hands-on outdoor adventures combined with research and storytelling. The Uri, kids are going to love this, Dylan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked in the mirror together. Maya leaned back against his chest, still sometimes amazed that this was her life now. I hope so. I've never taught anything this big before. You teach every day at the library. This is just a different classroom. Maya turned in his arms to face him. A classroom without walls or books or any of the things I'm comfortable with. Hey. Dylan cupped her face gently. Remember what you told me when I was nervous about giving that presentation to the school board? Maya smiled, remembering. That you know more about outdoor education than anyone in this county, and the kids need what you have to offer, right? And you know more about this area's history and ecology than anyone. These kids need what you have to offer too. We're not doing this alone. We're doing it together. The reminder helped ease Maya's anxiety. Everything had been easier this past year because they'd done it together. Not just the big things, but the small daily choices that built a life. Dylan had started spending most nights at her apartment, though he'd kept his place at the camp. Maya had begun joining him for morning runs through the forest, discovering she actually enjoyed the peaceful start to the day. They'd found rhythms that worked for both of them. Okay, Maya said, taking a deep breath. Let's go teach some kids about their home. The program was being held at the Pine Ridge Wilderness Camp, where Maya and Dylan had first met. As they drove up the familiar road, Maya thought about how different she felt now compared to that terrified woman who dreaded every moment of the library retreat. 28 fifth graders from the local elementary school were waiting for them, along with their teachers and several parents. Maya felt the familiar flutter of stage fright, but Dylan's hand found hers as they approached the group. Good morning, everyone, Dylan called out. Welcome to Stories in the Wilderness. I'm Dylan, and this is Maya. We're going to spend the next 3 days exploring your backyard. And trust me, you live in one of the most interesting places in the world. Maya stepped forward, her nervousness fading as she saw the curious faces looking up at her. These were the children who came to story time at the library, who asked her endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to space exploration. How many of you have lived here your whole lives? Maya asked. Most of the hands went up. And how many of you think you know everything about this place? A few confident hands remained raised, making Maya smile. Well, I've lived here my whole life too, 35 years. And I'm still discovering new stories about these mountains. Over the next 3 days, we're going to uncover some of those stories together. But here's the thing. We're not just going to read about them in books. We're going to visit the places where they happened, see the evidence for ourselves, and learn to read the clues that nature leaves behind. Like detectives? Asked a girl with pigtails. Exactly like detectives, Dylan said. Maya is going to teach you to be history detectives, and I'm going to teach you to be nature detectives. By the end of this program, you'll be able to look at any place around here and understand the stories it's telling. They divided the children into 4 groups, each taking turns rotating through different activities. Maya led historical exploration sessions, taking the kids to locations around the camp and teaching them to identify old foundations, read the landscape for signs of past human activity, and understand how people had lived in harmony with the environment for generations. Dylan's sessions focused on current ecology, tracking animals, identifying plants, understanding food chains, and seasonal changes. But the magic happened when their sessions overlapped, when historical knowledge and ecological understanding combined to create a fuller picture. See this clearing? Maya asked her group as they stood in a meadow near the camp. Can anyone tell me why there might be no big trees here? The kids looked around, puzzled. It was surrounded by forest, so why was this one area different? Maybe someone cut them down, suggested a boy named Alex. Good thinking. Dylan, what do you see when you look at the plants growing here? Dylan knelt down and pointed out different species. These are plants that need lots of sunlight. They can't grow under big trees. And see how the soil is different here? Richer, darker. So what do you think happened here? Maya asked. The kids thought for a moment before a girl named Sam raised her hand. Maybe people lived here a long time. Ego? And they cleared the trees? Excellent detective work, Sam. This was the site of a homestead in the 1890s. The family cleared the trees to build their cabin and plant crops. When they left, the forest started growing back, but it takes 100 years or more for big trees to grow. The plants we see now are the first stage of the forest returning. But why did they leave? Asked another student. That's where the stories come in, Maya said, settling onto a log. The kids gathered around her expectantly. They knew this tone, from library story time. She told them about the harsh winter of 1896 when snow fell for weeks without stopping, how the family had run out of food, how the father had walked 20 miles through deep snow to get help from town, how they'd survived that winter but decided the isolated life was too difficult with small children. The amazing thing is, Dylan added, the forest remembers that family. See that apple tree over there, half wild now? They planted that. And these raspberry bushes? They probably grew from seeds in the family's garden. The kids were fascinated, asking question after question about the family, about how people survived without modern conveniences, about what other signs they could look for. By the end of the first day, Maya's nervousness had completely disappeared. Teaching outdoors was different from teaching in the library, but the kids' enthusiasm was infectious. They were natural historians, eager to solve puzzles and uncover secrets. That evening, as she and Dylan cleaned up materials and prepared for the next day, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction she'd never experienced before. "That was incredible," she said. "Did you see how engaged they were? How they started connecting the pieces?" "I saw you," Dylan said with a smile. "You were amazing up there, completely in your element." "It didn't feel scary at all once we got started. It felt like what you were meant to do." Maya nodded, surprised by how right that felt. "Is that crazy? I've been working in the library for years and I love it, but this felt different, more alive somehow." "It's not crazy at all. You're a natural teacher, Maya. And you're teaching something you're passionate about to kids who need to understand their connection to this place." The second and third days of the program flew by. The kids learned to identify animal tracks, understand water cycles, recognize edible plants, and read historical maps. They visited old mining sites and learned about boom and bust cycles. They studied traditional ecological knowledge and modern conservation efforts. But more than that, they began to see their home differently. Maya watched as children who'd lived their whole lives in the shadow of these mountains suddenly understood that they were part of an ongoing story, connected to the land and to the people who'd come before them. On the final afternoon, each group presented what they'd learned to their parents. The kids had created maps showing both historical sites and current wildlife habitats. They'd written stories imagining what life was like for families who'd lived there generations ago. They'd collected plant samples and could explain the role each species played in the local ecosystem. "I never knew all this stuff was right here," said Maria, one of the older girls. "I thought history was just something that happened in other places." "History is happening right now," Maya told her. "You're part of the story of this place. The choices your generation makes will determine what it looks like for the kids who come after you."